Hello everybody, this video is a game in 1910 played between Emmanuel Lasker and David Janowski. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And the focus of this game, and what is instructive here, is prophylaxis, which is a chess term. You may have heard it before in another context. It basically means taking steps to prevent anything too catastrophic happening to you, to your position or to your pieces or something else. So to start off, d4 was played by Lasker and Janowski played d5, c4, e6, knight c3, and c5. So we've got a kind of Tarrasch here, sort of stemming from the Queen's Gambit declined. So these positions are usually very interesting middle games because there aren't a whole lot of exchanges of minor pieces, so there's a lot on the board. Yet usually the rooks and queen find a use, usually somewhere around the center of the board, the D to E, the E, D, C files usually, and knights and bishops are all about controlling of the center. So there's an interesting middle game battle that usually occurs. Knight f3 was played, and knight f6. So here, white decided to exchange on d5, and keeping the option open in terms of giving black an isolated queen's pawn. Doesn't do it immediately, but plays bishop g5. Bishop e6 was played. This is quite a common move in the Tarrasch. It does look a bit strange, but the bishop there is protecting d5 for later, and it can usually move around a bit to f5 or g4, depending on the situation. Also, if black manages to advance the pawn, sometimes black can give up the weak isolated queen's pawn and win white's a2 pawn, and then that would give black a queenside majority, two against one, which could be useful for the end of the game. e3 was played, knight c6, bishop e2. Bishop b5 is also a move that's been played many times. I think queen c7 or queen b6 would be perfectly fine for black here. Also bishop e7 if you don't want to get doubled pawns. So bishop e7 was played. Takes. So the idea is that black's already moved his bishop, so he has to waste another move in capturing it. Castles, castles. And now we have the start of the middle game battle. Both sides have developed all their minor pieces, both have castled. And the main difference between the pieces and the whole position is that black does have an isolated queen's pawn. We don't know whether that's a good or bad thing, whether it's an advantage or a weakness from the point of view of black. White does have an annoying pin, though, on the knight on f6, so the bishop on g5 can be rather a pesky piece. And white will just try and blockade on d4 and usually put his rooks on c1 and d1, with the queen going to maybe a4 or possibly b3 at some point. But again, the bishop on e6 might stop that from happening. Black will usually have his queen or her queen on either e7 or possibly b6, and rooks on c8 and d8. But sometimes e8 is also a possibility. Anyway, rook c1 was played, so activating the rook. Bishop back to e7, just stopping the pin. Knight d4 now, so the blockade has begun. Janowski didn't really like this idea, so he played rook c8 first, just activating the rook. And after queen d2, he then played knight e4. So here, to gain a tempo on the queen and to attack the bishop on g5, forcing the exchange of pieces off. I'm not sure if this is that good for black, because on first sight, takes, 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 it looks like black has repaired his pawn structure. The bishop on e6 is now pointing at a2, and after rook fd8, white might be in trouble with a pinned knight on d4. Then white will have the isolated queen's pawn, which could be a big weakness. But it's white's turn, so white can damage the pawn structure of black with knight takes c6. B takes was chosen. If rook takes, then I think white would just have taken rooks off, and the position would be identical to the one you see now, except the two rooks on the c file will have vanished from the board. So here, there's two isolated pawns for black, and white's pawns are all side by side. So queen a5 was played to defend a2 and attack a7. Rook fd8 was played, and now rook fd1 was played. So if we stop to take a look at the position as it is, I've just mentioned the pawns on the queen side. One way you can generally sort of work out whose pawn structure is better, especially in an endgame context, is you look at the so-called islands of the pawn, which is every sort of group of pawns that are all connected to another pawn side by side, or there's a pawn on an adjacent file, might be a correct definition, constitutes an island. And the fewer islands there are, the better your pawn structure. So if we take a look at white's position, he's got the h-pawn. Is there a pawn adjacent? Yes. The g-pawn. Is there a pawn adjacent to that? Yes. The f-pawn. And does the f-pawn have a pawn that's adjacent to that? Yes, the e-pawn. So that is one island. e3, f2, g2, h2 is all one pawn island. There's nothing on the c or d files, and then the a and b pawns, each one has an adjacent pawn, each other, so that will be a second pawn island. So there are two pawn islands for white, and now let's look at black. Black's got h, g, and f pawns, and there's an e pawn. So the e pawn is on an adjacent file to another pawn. So black's first pawn island is the h, g, f, and e pawns. That's pawn island number one. Then there's the c pawn. It doesn't have any pawns adjacent to it on a file next to it, so that's the second pawn island. And then there's the a7 pawn. Again, there's no pawn on a file on either side of it, or there's empty space to the left from white's perspective, and then on the right, no pawn. So black has three pawn islands, white has two. So white's pawn structure is superior. And my plan here, if I was playing black, if I was in Janowski's shoes, although it may look a bit wrong, there's a bit of pressure here on my pawns, so I would swap rooks, and then perhaps just defend my pawns with bishop d5. White might play b4, sort of trying to crash through and maybe activate more pieces, or have a nice advanced pawn that would look menacing. But after, say, I would just play a move like g6. Now this is the point of the video, really. This is what we call a prophylactic move, or a preventative move. And The reason for that is that if we rewind one move to before my suggested g6, the king is a little bit vulnerable, not at the moment, but possibly in a few moves' time, and there could be tactics around surrounding the king, in that there is a possibility of a back row mate or back rank mate, because the 3 pawns are stopping the king moving to the 7th rank, 7th file rather. No, 7th rank, and so rook to the back rank or the queen to the back rank would be mate. So it's just useful to prevent any ideas or potential of that happening by shifting a pawn forwards. And my idea for black would then be to play f5, perhaps, maybe not immediately, but in the future, and create a nice pawn chain starting on h7 and going to e4, which might be quite nice for black. And for white, I might do a similar thing by playing h3. Just, again, making sure that my king doesn't get mated on the back rank. So, in this position, which is my suggested line for black, I think white does have a slight advantage, just because the queen on a5 is a bit more active than black's queen. The bishop on e2 is more mobile than black's bishop, which is stuck defending and blocking the d file for white's rook. And white can shift his rook to the b or c files to make it more attacking and active. And yes, white does have a slight initiative, but black should be able to defend this fairly easily, and I think a draw would be a fair result here. Again, yeah, black might have to play accurately, and it isn't certain it will be drawn, but there's a good chance. This wasn't played in the game, though. After rook fd1, black instead played bishop d5 here. So similar to the position I've just outlined, but there's an extra pair of rooks on the board, which usually when there's a pair of rooks, the side with the attack can use them more effectively. So this might be very slightly better for white than the position I just showed. But after b4, again, g6 might be okay. And if you're white, you could play b5 here, because can anyone see what happens if c takes b5? Yeah, it's rather embarrassing. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and the rooks have been deflected away from defending the bishop, so now white can just simply win a piece. And will regain the pawn almost instantly. So this would be completely winning for white. So the move I might play as black would be c5 to perhaps have a passed pawn now. And, possibly black might be okay here. Maybe queen b7 to defend the bishop and try and stop white rolling the pawns up would be a good idea. Not immediately, though, because assume we gave white just a passive move like h3. If queen b7, can you see how white wins a pawn? Yeah, similar theme. Deflection again. Rook takes pawn on c5, and here, if black takes the rook, he's not defending his d8 rook, so white can take it with the queen. So this would be rather unpleasant. But as I said, queen b7, not immediately, but maybe queen to c7 might be an idea, possibly. There are lots of moves here that are perfectly okay for black to do. Instead, though, Janowski did not play a prophylactic move after b4, and I think he rather paid for it here. He played rook d6, so I think the idea is to double rooks on the d file and then perhaps move the bishop away, and he'll have activated his pieces, and swapping off wouldn't really hurt either for black. So that's the idea of the position here. But what did white play? What did Lasker find in this position? I'll give you 10 seconds. Again, remember, the topic of the video is prophylaxis, preventative moves, and how if you don't make them, you might get punished. So have a look. Another 10 seconds. Have a look at black's position and see what you can find as white. Yes, white wins by rook takes d5, taking the bishop. Rook takes rook, so black's temporarily the exchange up. White goes a piece up again with queen takes rook. And the game ended very, very abruptly with queen takes b4, rook takes c6, and Janowski resigned because Lasker, being a piece up, should quite easily win this game. And there are no back rank mates for black because bishop f1 will just defend against any checks by the queen. And you may ask, what about pawn takes queen? Well, who is better now with white to move? What's the evaluation, do you think? Well, with a little calculation, you'll see white's going a piece up. Rook takes c8, queen f8 is the only move that doesn't get him mated. Rook takes, king takes, and now it's just a bishop ahead for white. So this should be a very easy win for Lasker. Anyway, I hope you got something from this video. Remember, look at your opponent's plans, look at what your opponent is planning to do and what might happen, how the position might change, and try and nullify their threats. And you can even take preventative measures to stop the threat before it's even being directly threatened. So like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.